Hello, everybody, and welcome to our interview. Today, we're very happy to have Ben on the line with us. Ben is a member of Denver Communists. Ben, how you doing?
Doing great. How are y'all?
Doing well. Doing well. So, our first question: are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
No, no, I have not been. No. Uh-uh.
No. Okay. Was
Okay.
not expecting that answer.
No.
We were doing McCarthyism. We were trying to do a
Okay.
McCarthyism. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, interview over then. All right. Yes, we are trying to McCarthy,
Damn.
Yeah.
and it failed.
No, that was a good ruse. But no, our first kind of real question is, if you're going to define communism for someone who doesn't know what it is, how would you do that? Because I think this is something that, you know, hanging out in kind of lefty spaces, terms
Yeah.
get thrown around a lot.
A
Somewhat
lot.
slapdash. So, speaking to a member of Denver Communists, how would you define communism for someone who doesn't know what it is?
Yeah. I think, great question. I think there's like important, an important thing to kind of like talk about. Obviously, like, it's the big C word. Although you start out, making sure that I'm not a valid, Communist Party participating member. But yeah, like one of the answers that I would like to give is that the word communist or the term communist and the term socialist have oftentimes been used interchangeably throughout the history of the socialist movement. Of course, we kind of track our lineage back or like our tradition back to Marx and Engels as being kind of like the beginning of the tradition that we identify with. Socialist ideas or communistic ideas extend a lot further than that back into history. The basic idea that like the world should be a better place, like the basic understanding of like things are happening in society that we don't think should be happening, and we should be living in a more utopian society. I think we could loosely define that as like a communistic aspiration. But of course, we track ours, back to Marx and Engels, so that we describe as scientific socialism. So this is the idea that it isn't just enough to say we should have a better society. Um, to kind of like quote Marx's most famous quote, the point is not to understand the world, the point is to change the world. So Marx and Engels, their kind of like original project is how do we get really scientific about understanding what the contours are of our current social makeup, and then through that analysis, how do we then begin to change things for the better, right? With these socialistic utopian aspirations in mind, how do we begin to alter society in such a way to get there? So of course, Marx and Engels' big thing is like identifying the working class as the agent for social change. Way back then, the peasant class was much more um, uh, there was much more of them. It was much more significant. In 2025, the peasant class is a relatively teeny portion of the population, and Marx and Engels kind of predict that, right? They say that through imperialism, capitalism will continue to expand, will continue to expand and consume more of the globe, and the term is proletarianize, but turning more people into proletarians, into workers who are forced to sell their labor at a market that's below value so that the bourgeois class can generate profit. So that kind of goes all the way back then. And then as far as like the term socialist versus communist, because a lot of people are like, we have this a lot with like, well, I don't know if I consider myself a communist, but I'm definitely a socialist. Or they'll say like, they're like, well, I think socialism is great, but I'm not so sure about communism. And so the answer that I like to give is that it's oftentimes used interchangeably throughout history, in order to differentiate themselves from other movements. So whenever the Bolshevik Party initially qualifies or describes themselves or renames themselves from the, the Russian Social Democratic Party as RSDRP, I think is the acronym. But when they initially do that, when Lenin and Trotsky and Zinoviev, Plekhanov, all these guys, the builders of the Russian Revolution, changed their name. They're trying to distance themselves from the SPD in Germany, who at the time is the most robust, well-funded, well-resourced, most active workers' emancipation movement in the world. And Lenin, of course, is very in tune with them, and thinks that because of their class collaboration, because of their support of World War One, when the SPD supports World War One and supports war credits, is when Lenin says, we want to be distanced from these socialist or these democratic social democrats, and so we're going to call ourselves communist. And so that's kind of like where that like organizational qualifier comes from. And then, of course, our tradition says that after Lenin dies and after Lenin loses power, Stalin comes in. Stalin, kind of changes the nature of the Bolshevik Party, changes the nature of the Russian Revolution, and then we use the term Stalinizes it, turns into something that's much more top down. That's interested in socialism in one country and not international revolution. And so from there, after that shift, the word communist becomes associated with the Communist Party. And of course, like your opening joke was, turned to this kind of like big McCarthyist scare tactic. The big bad communists are going to come and, take your toothbrush, and force you to eat, cold toast, or whatever. And then after that, we want to kind of we try to distance ourselves from the Communist Party. And so that's where you have this kind of rise in like referring to yourself of socialist, which is where our organization, our previous organization comes from, the ISO, the International Socialist Organization, and the Democrats are part of that. So then we switch back, because we feel like primarily right now the organization that we want to kind of like distance ourselves from, as far as tradition and analysis goes, is the DSA. And so we don't want to be associated with the DSA. We want to be something separate from that. So we call ourselves a Denver Communist. And that's kind of like where we find ourselves now. Whether or not that's like the perfect decision, we're really not sure. I think we could just easily be referred to as the Denver Revolutionary Socialists or something like that. And that's what a lot of the former organizations who were part of the ISO ended up calling themselves, was Revolutionary Socialists of Seattle, Boston, and one of those cities. So yeah, that's kind of like, I think that's what I would say for where that word comes from or why we use that word.
Okay,
Cool.
awesome.
I was gonna say the last bit kind of ties into like the next question, which was going to be about the background of your organization, and so you kind of mentioned like you're split off from the ISO. So do you want to talk more about kind of Denver Communists' inception?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we damn, I should have checked my notes before I got this interview. So we were a member of we were a branch of the ISO, a 35-year revolutionary socialist organization that was started in Berkeley, and was primarily strongest in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, I believe. I wasn't in the ISO very long myself. We have other members who were in the ISO for longer and can speak a lot better to kind of like what that was like. But that organization dissolved in 2019, kind of like right before the pandemic. And it dissolved for a number of reasons. Part of those reasons was that it was discovered that someone who had just been elected to the steering committee, the highest governing body within the ISO, who I believe the number is 1,200 at its peak, was the membership of the ISO. Somebody who was elected to that steering committee had been involved in a rape cover-up a couple years before that, as part of like a disciplinary committee. And so somebody who was aware of that situation kind of like, told everyone about it whenever the person was like the steering committee, and it ended up resulting in the dissolving of the organization. So then after that, most of the membership kind of splintered off into, I think burnout would describe a lot of it, but a couple groups, a couple of cities, and a couple of kind of like, organizations stayed together, and Denver was one of those. So that's the organization, or that's where the Denver Communists come from. We're currently organized nationally with the group called Firebrand. Firebrand.red is our website, and that's primarily with us and Seattle, the former ISO branch in Seattle, as well as Boston, and then we just founded a new branch in New York that we've been working really closely with, as well as some at-large members. But there's a couple other organizations kind of like throughout, the revolutionary left milieu that are also, the next in have their heritage from the ISO. So yeah, that's kind of where we come from.
Cool. That's really awesome. That national unity is good to see.
Yeah, the whole national thing, or the whole national organization thing, has been honestly, like, we've been working on it for a while. I think this is like the fourth like regroupment project that we've been a part of, and it's pretty difficult. It's like it's hard to, like, I think maintain a perspective within multiple national organizations, and like maintain like an organizational structure, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we've been working at it quite a bit, and I think that it's definitely something. It's a worthwhile part of our project, and something we want to like maintain effort towards. Although it is difficult at times.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I keep yawning.
No worries, no worries.
Cool. So you guys would you say that the organization like structure has really changed since splitting off from the ISO? Like
Totally.
how has Den Comm's changed?
Yeah, I mean, like, the ISO is a much more kind of like mature organization, like much more mature organization. They like Haymarket Books is like an independent publisher out of Chicago that was founded by the ISO. That's now, I don't know if it's a publicly traded company, but like it's a large independent house. Like, just the general like organizational maturity and the ISO is a lot bigger. And so we're kind of like starting from ground one or from ground zero, and really trying to figure out what are like the different organizational structures that we think are necessary in order to, engender the kind of organization that we think is required to one day be a part of a workers' liberation movement, and so, part of that is like a radical practice of democracy, is a big thing for us. Leading with politics, as opposed to tactics, is a big thing for us. And so how do we instill those things within our organization, our organizational structure, that help, these things happen?
Okay. Next question is, can you tell us more about the focus of your work and what projects Den Comms is working on currently?
Yeah, we focus of our work, everything and nothing. I don't know. Yeah, I think that maybe different to other organizations, we try to be engaged and involved in as many social and labor movements as we have the capacity, and will allow us to be involved with them. So, there was a King Super strike a couple months ago, and we tried to send out members to the strike line, do some mutual aid there, bringing out food, stuff like that. The very first project that I was engaged in was during the teachers' strike, in 2016, 17, I believe that was. And we did like a tamales for teachers, trying to bring, hot tamales, not the candy, but like actual tamales, on the strike line for teachers then. I remember like how goddamn cold it was during that action, like 7 degrees. So yeah, that's kind of like, what we try to focus on. Right now, we've been involved in a pretty long campaign against the Drip Cafe, which is down on Santa Fe, and it's like famously run and owned by a church. It's like a non-profit, for-profit cafe kind of thing, that openly espouses homophobic and transphobic values, within their kind of like religious belief system. Gay people are going to hell, all that kind of stuff. So we've been, like protesting there, trying to get them shut down, trying to like put the word out that these people are trying to kind of like infiltrate our communities, and are trying to kind of like very casually slip in to community spaces. We want to be aware of that. We've been engaged in like a number of like anti-fascist stuff over the years, anti-police work. We're pretty well connected and close with Paul Castaway's family, and help put on the vigil for him every year. He's a Lakota man who was murdered by DPD, I think 10 years ago now. And so I've been engaged with his family, and helping to kind of like bring awareness around that, while also using that to really I don't know, one of the things we say is like recruitment and member development is like kind of like our two big goals. Trying to get people into an organization or into our organization, and then working to develop them as both thinkers and fighters and thinkers. To be members, to be valuable assets, to intervene in the class struggle to come.
Okay, awesome. Sounds like a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah.
So in regards to that, like the member development, who's like a good candidate to join your org? Who should be like looking to join the Den Comms?
Damn, anybody and everybody. Any and everybody. No, just kidding. I think that we really try to focus around like people who are coming to the kinds of anti-capitalist conclusions that we feel like we have a good answer for. I think that like a lot of our recruitment is focused on people that are probably, if not completely disillusioned with the Democratic Party, are close to being completely disillusioned with the Democratic Party, and are reaching a point where their thoughts are, I want to remain, or I want to be more engaged in the political discourse in our country, but holy fuck, all we have to do is just vote for more Democrats and vote for Democrats, and are looking for something that is a little bit more left of Democrats. So we would call this like class independence. We need to be running our organizations and building our social movements to ideally to one day congeal into a workers' party, but that needs to be done independently of the bourgeois parties. So of course, in America, we have this this beautiful, wonderful democracy where we have a two-party system, and everyone's rights and everyone's opinions are just represented so well at the ballot box. Just kidding. And so so that obviously doesn't exist, right? And so we want to be an active part in building a workers' party so that people have something to vote for and have something to be engaged in. But right now that doesn't really exist. And so I think a lot of our recruitment comes from people that are like, like former Bernie Sanders supporters, who for whatever reason, right, have been radicalized past that. Obviously right now, the ongoing genocide in Gaza has been the biggest thing, and watching, Democratic senators, Democratic politicians refuse to call it a genocide, apologize for it, watching Kamala Harris running a Shut Up, I'm Talking campaign, while actively funding the bombing and murder of children, has just been, kind of mind-numbing, I think, for a lot of people who still held out some kind of hope that there was some, agent of change within the Democratic Party, or some redeemable vein within the Democratic Party that they could just kind of like, latch onto that one part and expand it, and things could be different. And I think that this last period has really kind of thrown people out of that. And so then they come out of that and they're like, well, where do I go? What do I do? What are the ways that I can remain engaged in this? That isn't just voting for the next lesser of evil two candidates that isn't in fact lesser of evil at all. So
yeah. Heavy agreement with a lot of that. So Denver has a wide array, I'd say, of communist, socialist, general leftist leaning orgs. So why do you think Den Comm's over something like PSL or DSA or any of the others?
Hard question to answer. If I just pull out my shit list and go through all the ways that my haters have wronged me, that's a hard question to answer. I think that it's only really answerable within struggle, only really answerable like within our own kind of like experiences as activists, and then where you kind of like end up. We have members, contacts. We describe a contact as someone who's interested in the organization, hasn't yet kind of ratified themselves as a member, but comes to our meetings, attends our protests, with that kind of stuff, who either are former former members of, or who have looked into, or are more familiarly acquainted with these other organizations. And I think that everyone kind of like has their own particular reasons. From our experience, the PSL is too top down, that it takes its directives too much from like a more kind of like central command, and they don't engage in enough movement democracy. They're not actively engaged with working with, other, like outside of their membership, like with other people, and hearing, what do we want to do in this moment, not what are we going to do. But what is the movement asking for us to do? What is the expression of the people in this moment? And so, I guess that would be like an example. The reason that I think people kind of get away from the DSA is that it's these that it's electoral campaigns on electoral campaigns on electoral campaigns, and they kind of reach this point where they're kind of done doing that, or they're disillusioned with it, or they feel like it's not working, or whatever that is, and they're looking for a different home. Outside of that, obviously, those are kind of like the two, the two larger organizations that are out there, and there's a litany of other ones. I think a lot of our membership comes from a former kind of anarchistic bent, and are looking for more organizational structure, but are looking for more organizational structure that doesn't, infringe on their sense of like individual freedom, or like infringe on their sense of like individual, rights. Rights is the bad word, but like their own individuality. I think they kind of like find us, like, I would say most members of Denver Communists are former anarchists. I'm like, that's like, yeah, I think so. That's kind of like where our members generally come from.
About how big is Den Comm's?
I think we just hit 30 members, 30
Cool.
active and participating members. Yeah. And then, our weekly meetings usually range, I'd say, from 35 to 50. We do our meetings every Wednesday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. on Zoom. They're usually comprised of two elements, more of an educational, reading focused element, and then an hour of following that of more activism, ongoing projects, questions around national stuff, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we meet every week, and that's usually the range of our meetings. That doesn't mean that everyone's local to Denver. Like I said, we are engaged with other national stuff, so we do have members who tune in from outside of that, or from outside of Denver. Like we technically have a member of Denver Communists who lives in Australia, who just doesn't have an organizational home in Australia, but wants to be engaged in revolutionary politics and wants to, be a part of that. And so, we were like, fuck it, sounds like the best place for you to be right now is right here, while you continue to look for a more local, organizational home, that reflects the tradition, the values, and the tactics, that we think are most important right now, and because of the pressing issues.
I think it's so interesting that you said that a lot of your membership comes from an anarchist background. That I'm going to be candid with you, that's not something I was expressly expecting to hear, but that's definitely very fascinating. I do want to ask, has your organization noticed a change at all in, either membership or how you're kind of perceived by non-members since the second Trump administration? Because, you mentioned as part of the recruitment goals, or part of the, part of the body politic that you might hope to get involved with the organization are disillusioned Democrats. Have you noticed a change since this most recent Trump election?
Yeah. I think that in general, that maybe less so with the Trump administration and more so with the way that the Harris, what was the vice? I can't remember who the vice president was.
Waltz.
I could, yeah. I was gonna say I could give a fuck.
Sure.
Like insert war criminal B.
Sure.
But I think it was more so like the Kamala Harris Waltz, the way that they conducted that campaign, and how like fucking insulting it was to just like their constituents, to general people, just how incredibly tone deaf they proved their campaign to be, and they proved like the party to be. And I think that right, of course, we're referring most clearly like to the genocide, but also to like border policy, to immigration policy. Kamala Harris famously ran to the right of Trump on border enforcement. Last election cycle, Joe Biden ran to the right of Trump on police funding. Openly, this is during George Floyd, right? Was open like, oh, I'm going to fund the cops even more than this like orange psychopath with the toupee, right? And so I think that I would say it's more so the response that the Democratic Party, or kind of like I'm not going to call the Democrats left wing because they're not fucking left wing, but it's more so like the response of liberal democracy to this kind of like Trump moment or whatever, to this like surge rightward within the Trump moment, that's just been completely tone deaf. And I think people are really, the Democrats are really showing their ass in a certain kind of way of like, really losing their ability to be like the adult in the room. And I think that's kind of like what they always hung their hat on, where these like crazy Republicans would get up here and start hooting and hollering about, abortion rights, and would start, just getting all nuts. And the Democrats could always position themselves as like the reasonable person in the room. And then now, we have this like fucking dumpster fire of Joe Biden's, presidency or whatever, where he famously lost Roe versus Wade, right? Like that happened under a Democratic president. And then of course, now we have, the genocide in Gaza. And I think it's just continually pushing people more disillusioned away from the Democrats and looking for something else, kind of realizing that the Democrats are not the answer to any of this.
That is one of our favorite things to do on this podcast, is to talk shit about the Democrats and their total ineptitude. I mean, because as you were talking about the Harris Walls campaign, one of the things that really stood out to me is when she was, fucking running around Pennsylvania campaigning with Liz Cheney. And it's like, what can you even fucking say? Right. We're in deep agreement that the Democratic Party is continuing in its decades-long process of abandoning any sense of class politics.
Right. And of course, you can see them now trying to rehabilitate their image and trying to like rehabilitate their position within, within broader politics, with like this whole AOC Bernie Sanders thing where they like, flew around the country talking about like against the billionaire class and stuff like that. Of course, like they're aware of these dynamics. Like, they're very self-conscious of like they're losing their ability to govern in an effective way. Like Mamdani is the best example, right? Of like really trying to put their effort behind these, like, well, these aren't those old stuffy Democrats. These are the new cool Democrats. That aren't afraid to say things like socialism and this kind of stuff. We also want people to be disillusioned with them as well. Right. We also want to, make the point that this is an institutional, that this is a systemic issue, that this isn't just because Joe Biden is like halfway into his fucking casket trying to run a presidential campaign. This isn't just because Kamala Harris is a goddamn cop and is running on genocide. This is like an institutional issue within the Democratic Party. And we want to have a class analysis. We want to have like something to say strategically about this, not just like, oh, what's the next, old like bag of bones that they're going to throw at a podium to try to get you to vote for it. We want our analysis to like extend past that and talk more about, like we use the term like the gravity of the Democratic Party and how that changes politicians, it changes policy, it changes a progressive movement's ability to like enact actual change and actually build a movement that has the potential to challenge class power. Not just like this kind of like fantastic, revolution today, revolution tomorrow kind of way. But in like what are the real movements, or what are the real steps forward that we can be taking as a movement for that to kind of like be on the agenda?
Right. No, I'm down a lot of that. You mentioned when Bernie and AOC were doing their kind of barnstorming tour around the country, and they came here and they drew, drew however many thousands of people they did. And I remember I was down there, and there were some communist groups tabling it. I don't know if Den Comm was one of them, but
we were there.
This leads me to my next question. And it sounds a little bit like a joke question, but it is there's a grain of sincerity in it. why do communists seem to like newspapers so much? Because when I was at that event, and almost every event I've gone to, there's a communist stand. I'm not saying Den Comm specifically, but there is a group calling themselves communists, and they have reams of newspapers.
Right. Yeah, totally. Because newspapers are sick. I mean, who doesn't like analog media? Come on. Digital's dead. Get yourself some vinyl and get hip. No, I think that I think so. We used to peddle newspapers as well. I myself has never been a newspaper peddling communist, because I was so new to the ISO. But the ISO is also a newspaper peddling Trotskyist, communist organization. So for sure, I think that that's like it's definitely an apt observation. I'm still in favor of it. I think that organizing ourselves around shared political understandings of the current issue is the best way, and is the way that we should be organizing. And that's kind of like what the newspaper is like designed to do. I'm not going to sit here and like defend, like the newspaper all the way to my revolutionary grave. But I do think it's a good way of centering politics at the very beginning of organizing. It's a good way of centering our political orientation and our degree of political agreement from the onset, and not putting politics at the tail end of our organizing efforts. I think like the PSL is like a really good example of this. If you go onto the PSL's website or whatever, you can read all these like these anti-cop stances, these anti-democrat stances, for the people, to the people, all this kind of stuff. But then we look at their actual practices and what they're engaging. They're collaborating with police to pull permits. They're working with any kind of like democratic NGO that pops up that can engender a crowd. They're not running their organization democratically, and they're not running their movements, not running their actual protests democratically, right? And so we really want to like put those political questions at the forefront of our organizing so that our tactics reflect them. And that kind of like is helpful if you have a newspaper, if you have like, like a piece of, I'm not wedded to the newspaper, I promise. But if you have like a piece of paper, if you have a written down set of politics that everyone can read with, interact with, and hopefully like debate about. We're very like pro argument. We're very pro, let's have the discussion. If somebody thinks that we should be actively campaigning for Mamdani and Mamdani-esque candidates, then like that's a discussion that we are really interested in having. And we think it's a lot easier to have that discussion if you have actual publications, or if you have actual written down political statements that you can hand to people, that you can talk about, and then if you can read them from other people and then engage with. I guess like all in the history of like, the beauty of like the democracy of polemics. Having a political discourse that ideally sharpens our movements and sharpens our politics, and moves us towards an agreed on set of politics that can be progressive in a sharp way, like in a way that can make change.
Okay, I'm down with it. I'm down for physical media.
Yeah. But I mean, we have a national organization right now. And we don't have a newspaper, and there really is no talk of like starting one right now.
Yeah, getting it back online.
No. Sure. We're like, there are plenty of fish to fry before we like get back into that kind of stuff. But we do have a lot of like if y'all or anyone who listens to this, if y'all ever see the Denver Communists out at an action, we're probably standing behind a table, and there's probably a bunch of literature on that table that we would love for you to take. So while it's not literally a newspaper, we still are very like oriented around printed documents with clear political orientation written on them.
Follow-up question. If Lenin were alive today, do you think he would be a TikToker?
Oh, wow.
Or like
question.
More of a Tumblr, like a Tumblr queen?
A Tumblr, yeah. He'd definitely get thrown out thirst traps on Tumblr. Those tasteful Tumblr thirst traps. Yeah, I love that. Like Lenin would be a beast on Twitter meme. I love that idea. I don't know. I guess this is like more of a personal thing, but I go back and forth on like, social media and like, how useful it is for political purposes. Of course, we can spread politics with memes, with like, TikToks with these kind of stuff. But I do think that it requires like a lot more further engagement. I don't think Lenin shied away from propaganda at all. I think Lenin was very pro-propaganda, so I think that he would be actively engaged in having a Bolshevik TikTok. But I don't know if he himself would be the one who was like generating that content. I think he would probably be adopting a little bit different role than like the shining face of Bolshevik TikTok. So yeah, but I think he'd probably have he'd be putting on hit pieces on TikTok.
Right.
He'd be Lenin was not afraid of a sharp polemic, that's for sure. He was not afraid of insulting his political enemies.
Yeah, he probably would be a beast on Twitter. Agree
Yes.
with that. Okay, so next question is so we were counting and we're pretty sure that there's like at least 5 different communist organizations here in Denver alone. So why do you think there are so many different communist organizations?
Ooh, man. I don't know if you count like the Revolutionary Communists of America and that.
Yeah, we did.
The RCA, this like MAGA communist thing, but holy fuck, they got to be the best example for that. Is that anyone can throw communists on an organization and call it communism and just run like the wind with that word, just like, and no one's gonna fucking
Wait, is
stop
RCA
them,
are those are they MAGA communists?
Yeah. So they're like, we actually just wrote a piece on this. Yeah, but yes. So they're like they like identify Trump as like a working class politician, and like while his certain policies might be this, he's like giving voice to the unrepresented, within American, underserved politics and stuff like this. So yeah, God, no, I'm not sure if it's RCA or if it's the other one. Hold on, I feel like I'm gonna mess this up.
Well, you'll be forgiven because there's a lot of them and it's really easy to conflate them. So we have had similar struggles with trying to parse out who is who and what their different beliefs are.
I feel like
ACP.
maybe
ACP.
I was gonna say I think you might be talking about ACP maybe.
Yes. Yeah,
I know some people from RCA and that's like the exact opposite vibe I've gotten from them.
That, for sure. Yes. Yeah. RCA is another. We have several former RCA members that quit the RCA who used to be, they like just rebranded. The RCA is like brand new and it used to be called something else. But we have several members that were RCA members that are now Denver Communist members. And they have big beef with the RCA for other reasons that I probably shouldn't talk about, or that I won't talk about because I don't know them as well. But I'm referring to the American Communist Party. And just the fact that they're just communist in name only, like down to the bones. It's just horrendous, right? They're MAGA communists. And so like that's obviously this like glaring example. But all of that to say, no one's like sitting at the top of communism headquarters, like emailing cease and desists over organizations that use the word communist. You can kind of like, do whatever you want to do with it. And so yeah, so we would say that we are in the tradition of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, and Rosa Luxemburg are kind of like the tradition that we identify with specifically. And someone says like, what is your kind of communism? We're going to start referencing a lot of their work and a lot of like the theoretical foundations that they laid down that we are trying to like, act in the spirit of. So Stalin, like we completely reject Stalin and the purges, following, the bureaucratization of the Bolshevik Party. So I think like, anybody can call themselves a communist, and it doesn't really like, it's not that it doesn't mean anything, it's that you can like adopt all kinds of policies. I think maybe like a clear one, so people think that we're in the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA, that, has kind of like famously just been campaigning for any Democrat since whenever. And so one of our big things is class independence. We're just never going to campaign for Democrats ever. No matter how cool they are, no matter how progressive they are. Our analysis is that the Democratic Party is a bourgeois class built by, bought for, sold by the bourgeois party, and we gain nothing by supporting their politicians at all. And so we should distance ourselves from those as much as possible. And we would say class independence is core to a communist politic. But of course, the CPUSA would say something else. They would say, well, we're communists and we think supporting Democrats is great because it, raises the standard of living for working class Americans or something. I don't know what they would say, but something like that.
Okay, this is kind of a related question, and it's probably our spiciest question that we have for you. So you guys have a bit of a reputation for not really wanting to work with a lot of the other leftist orgs in Denver. And so let me preface this by saying I am a DSA member. However, I would say criticizing DSA is like the unofficial DSA pastime. So like, I'm not at all mad at people who are sitting on DSA for any number of things. One of the largest ones being the overemphasis on electoralism, because I do think that is a problem. However, I do want to push back on something you said. Well, I don't know if it's a pushback, but it's like when you were talking about how you guys were working on the King Soopers strike and doing strike support, like DSA came in real heavy with that. And we raised probably like $3,000 for that. And we all, like, I participated in it personally, where we, came out and did a lot of like direct support, bringing food and stuff, and marching on the picket lines of King Soopers all over Denver. And so I think there may be more alignment in the work that like our local chapters are doing than maybe you guys realize. So I'm just gonna say that. I will also say I'm not a democratic socialist. I am actually an anarchist, and all of like the Bernie worship and stuff is really not my jam. And I'm not really like super ideologically aligned with DSA, but I'm in it because it feels like the best fit for me with my own personal politics. All of that said, do you agree? Do you think that reputation for not really wanting to collaborate with other orgs is deserved? And like, could you speak to that whole vibe a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I'm so glad you asked this. I was wondering if y'all were going to ask this. I was like, this is like maybe not the one topic, but like outside of like, how do you feel about Kronstadt? This was like maybe one of those topics that I was interested to get into. So our reputation for being difficult to work with. I think that for a lot of people, we are difficult to work with because we refuse to kind of like be quiet about political debates. I think that's a big reason. I would say that our reputation on not wanting to work with other organizations is unfounded. In my experience, I joined like 2017, 2018. So like 8 years in the organization, something like that. So that's, kind of like, obviously, Denver activist history goes back deeper than that. But I don't think that the reputation of Denver communists don't want to work with you is founded. I think that so many times it's other groups that don't want to work with us in the way that we organize. And that's unfortunate, right? Like that's obviously not something that we're like proud of, but it's something that we've kind of like refused to compromise on. I'm trying to think of, I wish I'd like figured out all the receipts for this or like all the details around this. But I knew that there was like an action that we were looking at organizing with the DSA several years ago. And it was like a speak out maybe around trans rights. There was something like that. And there was like the DSA said, in order for us to be in this coalition with them, in order for us to like do this action with them, we had to sideline our criticisms of the DSA while that was happening. And to that, we said no. We're going to continue to like be critical of, and we're going to continue to like have these debates, hopefully in a public forum where everyone's, where everyone can kind of like benefit from those debates and benefit from these clear understandings as much as possible. Because we think that's what's really necessary in order for our movement to move forward in a successful way. The last time that we saw the PSL in an organizing march or an organizing meeting that we were a part of, that I think DSA was actually in too, was during Trump's first election. There was a coalition called the Coalition to Close the Concentration Camps. And this is right before that encampment went up in Aurora that lasted for like all summer long. This is like the action that kind of like preceded that. But it was PSL, I think it was DSA, some anarchists, us, and this group called Lights for Liberty. which was this like Democratic Party kind of like NGO appendage that had grown, kind of overnight because they're Democrats, right? So it goes to this organizing meeting. We're talking about stuff. And towards the end of it, one of the Lights for Liberty people, right? This is like an immigrant rights march. One of the Lights for Liberty people says, "Hey, just so y'all know, the local police department, Aurora, chief, whatever his nuts are, has been so generous to offer us some of his undercover agents to be a part of our march to make sure that everyone's safe." And like, I think my head actually literally exploded. But as I picked the pieces of my brain back up, I couldn't believe what was coming out of her mouth, that she wanted to invite undercover cops into an immigrant rights protest, into a march, as this way of like keeping things safe. So of course, me and some of the people that were in the coalition said, absolutely not. There's no way that we will agree to have this as part of an action. And the PSL was like super against that. They said this is fine. Y'all are being difficult. Y'all are having, you're being, purists, about your politics or whatever. And we disagree with that. Of course, we like having undercover cops in a march is dangerous for immigrant families for all these reasons. Working with cops at all, much less having them on the marches, is just terrible. And the PSL walked out of that organizing meeting. They like rage quit, just left. So we like ended up continuing the march, with the action or whatever. But I think that like just serves as an example of like a moment where there's times when like, political agreement is tried to be had, or, coalitions are tried to form, and then things kind of like dissolve, over important political issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I have heard of similar issues with PSL and wanting to collaborate with the cops and invite the cops in. And for the record, I am extremely ideologically opposed to that. I do think, I don't know, it's been a while. I mean, I have just hearing that you guys were doing strike support and stuff, I feel like, maybe it would be worth having a conversation, because DSA, again, does have a reputation of being libbed up. It's a well-deserved reputation. But we're actually going to have some DSA members on next week where, like, we've definitely pushed our chapter quite a bit further to the left. And, like, it's national has been, moving further to the left. And, like, I cannot envision any of the current organizers in DSA being down to like collab with the cops in any way. We're definitely like a very abolitionist chapter, which we were not, 5 years ago. So
Yeah.
I that's my, little pie in the sky dream, is that maybe there could be some
I'd love
work
that.
together.
We'd love that.
Because, the organizations shift and evolve, and I think the times are shifting. But yeah, that's whatever. PSLs is also has a reputation for being very difficult to work with, for the record. It's certainly not just Den Comms. And I was really happy to see that you guys are signed on with the No Concentration Camps in Colorado coalition that Dorian is organizing. We had him on last week, and we're really stoked about that. So we're glad to see you guys your name on that action, which is, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'd love to. I mean, obviously, we don't have to like cover this right now, but yeah, I'd love to like have a further conversation about that with you, or with with whoever in current DSA, and I can do that like on behalf of myself, or I can do that on behalf of the Denver Communists,
for sure,
like more officially or whatever. But I think that those are the exact kind of political spaces that we really want to be engaged in. Is like, how do we join together in coalitions on the highest degree of political organization or political agreement, with which to move forward. That comes to the understanding of like, maybe we're not going to reach 100% when it comes to political agreement, but and that's what coalition building is, right? It's what are the set of politics that are necessary to agree on for this coalition, for this action. How do we have those political discussions, agree on them, and then move forward with logistics, move forward with propaganda, messaging, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think like, obviously, this stuff going on, but hit me up on the side.
Yeah,
like
could be an ongoing conversation. We'll see what we can make happen. But thank you.
Yeah.
I love this. I'm not gonna lie, I love this. I'm really big on like the coalition building and working together, despite our differences, because we all think differently a little bit on some things.
Yeah.
So one thing I know that even some like leftists struggle with like the term communism, I think, because of its ties to Stalin and Pol Pot and bad actors, in my opinion.
Right.
But how do like the Denver communists combat that like negative connotation in discussions with other political folks?
Yeah, I mean, big answer. I think that not being too wedded to the word communism and not being too emotionally tied to the word communism is really important. Like, we care about the ideas, we care about like the theories that people who also identify themselves as communists kind of like put out, the strategies that they're about, and not being too defensive when someone says "fuck communists." You're like, yeah, probably, because you like we probably agree. You're probably talking about a version of communism that I also fucking hate. Of course, like I described earlier, we made the decision to call ourselves communists. But when we made that decision, we had other people, we had dissenting voices who were like, we don't think we should do this because it could associate us with the Stalinized, with Stalin's communism, or with like with North Korea's communism, or with with Venezuela's communism, right? And we don't want to do that. So it's a decision that we made, and there's sometimes where I think, oh, in this specific instance, maybe we should have identified ourselves as revolutionary socialists. But yeah, I think that we just kind of have to like continue to organize and be activists in the tradition of these strategies and these ideas, and not be too kind of like, just like communism or nothing, communism or broke. There's other ways that we can describe ourselves. There's other ways that we can like, other terms that we can use to describe the same ideas. And those are like, we want to have the conversation, not just like lob terminology over the fence at each other, right? Well, you're a communist. Well, you're an anarchist. It's like, well, like, what do you mean? Like, what do those words actually mean? And how can we kind of like sit down and talk about them and argue about them, right? Like, debate and whatever. People are like, it's the same, it's all the same stuff. It's like, sometimes it's going to be heated. Ideally it's not, but sometimes it's going to get kind of heated when you're talking about political agreement. Like, there's been like a series of kind of like, I've been calling them like community or activist community meetings at like the Unitarian Church, maybe like the past couple months. They've been called by like all the homies over in GSUS, General Strike US, and so just kind of like this kind of general milieu of like Denver leftist, the 51 50 50 51, is that it? Yeah, 50 51, kind of like that, new like like new expression of leftist politics. And one of their big things has been like unity. We have to unify together. We have to like join together. And that's all like, yeah, big tent. Yeah. And that's great. Like, of course, we should be fighting for unity, but on what pretense? Like, under what political orientation? Like, and obviously, the genocide in Gaza has been if not the key issue that we need to be unifying around. And if you're not talking about free Palestine, I don't want to fucking unify with you. If you're not talking about from the river to the sea as like, as a coalition policy, I'm not trying to unify with you. Like, unity at all costs is not the answer forward. And so like, to tie back again, like, we think that agreeing on a certain of political principles, and unifying around a radical set of principles, we think is like is the way to move forward. Not like, we all just need to get along. Well, like, get along around what? Like,
like, that's when people of color and trans people get left behind in our own country. But then also like, like, if you're trying to have us get along with Democrats, like, they can't even acknowledge there's a genocide happening, multiple genocides happening. So
yeah.
And
like, and not to...
I mean, I think that whole kind of big tent, I don't know, I feel like that's Brian Loma coded. I think Brian Loma is a part of that, and from which whatever. Won't get into that. But I feel like their organizing political principle is just fuck Trump, which like for me just isn't really enough. It's like such a really baseline where it's like, yeah, fuck Trump, but there's there's a lot more that we need to be standing for and organizing around. And
Right.
I feel like they're kind of very limited to just like Orange Man bad, which like, yeah, Orange Man bad,
right.
but like Democrats also pretty trash. Yeah.
This might be a little bit of like a hot take, but I feel like the fuck Trump vibe is mostly because that's most of the people that like comprise them. Whereas like some of the people I know a bit better that work in 50-50 or not work in because none of us get paid for this shit. But
You're not getting
organize with
paid?
50-51
Hold on, you're not getting paid for this?
are oh god, I wish. Are like vocal about those like about the issues like I mentioned before. But when your base doesn't care to be shouting free Palestine and protect trans kids and that shit, like it's not. It just gets disappeared, which sucks.
Yeah.
And that is the getting left behind that I was talking about just a few minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like it has the potential to kind of turn into like a, into like this abstraction. Like Trump is like equated to like evil, and it's like we don't want to be evil, or like, like, well, what does that even mean? What are the policies? Like, what are the material contours? What's like the political landscape look like? What are the slogans that we need to be putting out right now that can advance our movement forward? And say no to hate is not it, dog. Like, it's just like, it's just not sharp enough. We have to be kind of like embedding our politics into our slogans. We have to, of course, that also means like, we don't just stand on the street corner and say, we need to have a revolution. Like, that's also fucking wild. But we need to be like, enunciating the path forward through like our politics, through our activism, through the strategies that we come up with together to hopefully, develop something that can kind of like, move us forward. And I think that there's lessons that we've learned in the past. Just because we don't know everything doesn't mean that we can't know nothing, right? There's strategies that we've learned throughout history that are guaranteed to lead us astray. Things like collaborating with bourgeois parties. And there's also strategies that have been proven to be pretty effective, like maintaining independence away from cops. Or also, not abandoning the international proletariat, standing with Palestine, even when it's not fucking popular, standing with Palestine, kind of like vulgarly standing with Palestine, even when it gets you kicked out of spaces. If I'm getting kicked out of a space that doesn't want to stand with Palestine, that's not a space that I want to be in. And that's like a pretty like, kind of like, it sounds black and white and it sounds kind of sectarian. But it goes back, I think, this political understanding or this organizational understanding that we need to be organizing on a set of shared politics, and we need to be like working out what those politics are, and that can only come about through like some debates and conversations, but also can only come about by not just saying unity over everything, and like we have to be thinking more about it than just that.
Well, yeah, I know you mentioned the idea of like collaborating with bourgeois parties, and you mentioned at the top, if you take that big tent shit too far, you eventually will wind up voting for war credits, and then you're fucked. Like that's in no uncertain terms. But Ben, you've been exceedingly generous with your time, man. Thank you so much.
Totally.
Where, if people want to get involved with Denver Communists, what's the best way to do that? How can they get involved?
Is it honestly, we've been getting a good amount of like contacts who just Google Denver and communism, and we're the first
Classic.
hit, which is so sick. But our website is denvercommunist.org. You can find all of our information on there. We meet on Wednesday evenings, every Wednesday evening from 6 to 8 on Zoom. You can, post the Zoom, our bit.ly in the notes, the episode notes, if you'd like to, but that's all open to the public. Anybody can come read some communism with us, come read some stuff. I think next week we have a discussion on why would anyone celebrate the death of Charlie Kirk. So if you're looking for,
yeah, good question.
So if you're looking, So if you're looking for, a discussion about, what are the, political ins and outs of the whole Charlie Kirk thing, what's the ins and outs of like, individual terrorism, political assassination, in regards to like communism or communist strategies, then That'd be a great meeting for you. But yeah, every Wednesday, 6 to 8 on Zoom, public meetings. Come check us out. Our website, denvercommunist.org. Come check us out.
Awesome. Well, yeah, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. It's been great talking with you, learning more about Denver Communists, and I think this is been great for us. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
And I'm sure we'll see you
Appreciate
out there.
You. Awesome. I'll see y'all soon. Yeah, I guess I don't. Yeah, if y'all see me out, Ben is my real name. Ben's our life. If you see me out on the table, order, be sure to say what's up. Remind me of how I know you from, because I might forget. But yeah, anyways, nice talking with y'all.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Yeah, of course.
It's really great. Thank you.
Yeah. Later, Gators.